Good morning. I'm Bryan Troop from St. Louis, Missouri. Let's go ahead and back up here. Talk on Does God Belong in Exoplanetary Exploration? I'm sure not a popular topic in this conference, but it's one that's interested me since I was about 15 years old. My first encounter with this question occurred in 1967 when I was a 15-year-old kid growing up in Brazil. And if you remember what happened in 67, Apollo 1 burned. They had to fire and kill 3 of our astronauts. And the next Sunday, my Sunday school teacher said, God did that because people don't belong anywhere except on Earth. And I thought, that's an interesting theological proposition, not shared by too many in this room, I don't think. So we'll move on. My training is primarily in medicine. I'm a surgeon. Most of my career has been in care of injured patients. During my career, I've had time to work on a master's in theology and also do doctoral work in medical ethics, bioethics. So exploration has been an interest of mine since I was a child, as it has for probably most of us in the room. There are several things that are important as the background for this talk. Les Johnson mentioned that if we're going to explore the outer regions, it's going to take all of us. And by all of us, it means all of our thoughts, politics, religion, and quirks that we all have. So we've got a lot of work to do. This is a world ship, also a generational world ship. There's lots of interesting ways to describe this. In the October issue of Scientific American in 2023, Sarah Scholes mentioned that the title of her article was Why We'll Never Survive or Live in Space. And her reasons included several technical reasons, which we know about, but including radiation risks, glycogen storage diseases, and so forth. And one of the other big areas that she mentioned was the lack of interpersonal substrate that we've developed. And so this is part of a continuation of what she did. I want to mention some assumptions I make here, which we'll see as we go along. Exploration requires huge travel times, as we've been talking about for the last few days. My position here, position of many people, is placing humans in stasis is not currently possible, and the research on it is probably unethical. And it takes such a long time to do those studies that it's going to put us way back in exploration if we have to do that. We had a speaker yesterday that mentioned a world ship of a few hundred people, but the minimum survivable population for humans is closer to about 10,000 people. And we'll go into some of that a little bit later here. The other point, which we haven't talked about in this conference, is that mission resupply is going to be largely impractical. I thank Dr. Hampson here for all of his talk on tissue engineering the last couple days, especially your seminar. That was great. I learned a lot from that. I didn't know all that stuff, and that's been my business. So, why should we consider religious preferences? And there are several reasons. With 10,000 people, there are going to be differences of opinion. I didn't want to talk about political differences of opinion. Religious differences of opinion are probably present in this room, and we haven't even talked about that. Currently in the world, about 70% of humanity has some religious preference, and that's about what United States has. The religious preference in countries like Russia and China are much lower than that, however. And it's been declining steadily over the last couple of centuries, but it's still there. For one of the assumptions I made for calculations, you'll see later on, is that it will run about 50%. The other thing to note, and this is primarily from Pew Research, is that about 25% of adults change religions during their lifetime as an adult. That's a fairly high percentage. And that applies, by the way, those that are raised atheists and change to some sort of religion. So even if we decided we were all going to be the same religion on that 10,000 population vessel, there's going to be some people who say, no, I've changed my mind. And we expect people to change their mind. And we need to have the resources available to accommodate them, in my opinion. Why should we have religion at all? Why various religious groups? The existential challenges in space exploration, I think, will be very real after you spend a couple hundred years on a generation starship. You'll wonder, why are we even doing this? What's our ultimate goal here? Religious leaders have also helped solve interpersonal, group, and family conflicts, which invariably are going to arise on these. Most religious groups have at least some basic ethical presuppositions that we can agree with. And religious behavior also provides structure for many of our people, especially on a very long trip. Dr. Hayek pointed out on Monday on his excellent talk that exploration is very expensive. We have a complex mission and we cannot fail. If we fail to address social issues, and to me religion is just one of the social issues that we have to address, but an important one. We need to get this right the first time. A collapsed colony will not do us much good in the long run. Do we really need 1,000 or 10,000 people, 10,000 colonists? The answer is, I don't know. We've not done this before. We have looked at minimum viable populations on many species on Earth. Our biologists have done this for us. For humans, on Earth, it may run as little as 3,000 probability of survival for a colony. The problem with those studies is that's done on an Earth environment, and we don't know what it's going to be. The other problem with that is these are 90% probability estimates. And looking at someplace close to Alpha Centauri, we don't want 90%, we want closer to 100%. So if you stage it up, it's closer to 10,000. We don't know what the exoplanet is going to be. My assumption, by the way, actually it's not an assumption for any of these calculations, is that the potential colonists will live on the generation ship for 100 years by the time they figure out how to survive on an acceptable planet. And it may be much longer than that. The other issue that we have with humans and exploration is, why do we go anywhere? It turns out in prehistory we don't have much data on why humans migrated. In the historical period of human existence, we do know that many of our migrations, including some of the largest ones present today, involve religion. And religious groups have fueled migrations for at least 3 millennia now. Primary reasons are to avoid persecution or perceived persecution. They want a place to create their own culture so that's not an oppressive culture. And they want to control their own economic resources. And those seem to be common factors for most religious migrations. So, can we just wait, form a generational ship and decide what we're going to do with everybody? Start taking a poll when they get on the ship and figure out all the Baptists over there, all the Buddhists over here, and we'll figure it out after they get on. Short answer is no. These require forethought. It doesn't require organization afterwards. Primarily because the first few years of travel or separation are the most critical. Our sociologists have looked at people who do migrate and people that move just simply from city to city. And even finding religious preferences, for example, takes us a couple years. And for finding social connections, takes minimum of 6 months for those of you that have moved. And these are critical times, especially leaving all of your relatives and friends behind. So also the early experiences help with bonding. So we want to establish what we're going to do before we start. So if we're going to establish what we do before we start, how do we do it? As I mentioned earlier, about 25% will change religious preferences. And there is some research regarding minimal congregational size, and that's what we're looking at. If we want to establish religion on a generation ship, what size should it be? One of our sociologists, Dr. Dunbar, actually estimated that the minimum size for a long-term stability for a group is about 150 to 160. Several of our religious scholars have estimated that on Earth it survives about 100 people will live in long-term congregations and still survive. For this project, I actually took 150 people as the minimum congregation size. So we're going to look at 150, but let's go back to the size. If we have 10,000 people, divide that by half, because I'm assuming here that half of the people don't want anything to do with religion. By the time we actually make this starship, it may be down to 25%, so you'll have to recalculate. If we divide that by 150, it gives us about 33 different congregations or religious groups that we could accommodate and probably should plan for. And that's basically the thrust of this. There are a few other potential problems. Without identifiable religious groups, it may take years for connections. If we don't do this, these are problems for not doing this. A religious minority may try to co-opt the entire colony, and that is going to make the religious marketplace, that's a term, very, very non-survivable for everybody else if we're not careful. The other term, religious landscape, will be here too. There is no guarantee on something like this that these religious groups will survive at all. Some will go extinct, some will grow, and we don't know how that's going to happen. I'm sure our religious scholars will look forward to seeing what happens. I point out that almost all these religious leaders will need to be bivocational. Some will be pilots. They'll be doing all other kinds of things anyway, and that's just part of it. Some questions I always have is, what congregations will prosper? Which ones will decline? Is this predictable? Be a nice job for somebody who wants to study colonies in space in the future. And I've already thought of some hypotheses. How important is age distribution for long-term survival? I don't know the answer to that either. We think The null hypothesis is that the age distribution will represent the Earth in general. What kinds of new religions will develop? We don't know that either, but these are good questions to ask and good areas, I think, for long-term research. The exoplanetary environment may decrease or increase the minimum viable population just on the Starship. Religious, as I mentioned earlier, religious practices are declining throughout the world. I don't think they'll go away for millennia at least, but we'll have this with us for as long as I think we're still in our exploration phase. We have never studied this before. The other problem I worry about, especially today, is that are we going to spend money on solving this problem or not? And I don't know that we have the appetite to spend money to study the problem, but it'd be nice to look at. So, conclusions, we expect about 10,000 people to travel. Travel time would be measured in centuries, if not millennia, by the time we have to terraform some planets. We'll need a generation starship to transport these people, and about 50% of the colonists I expect to have a religious preference when they embark. And religion has already played a huge part in human migration, at least over the last couple millennia. I mentioned when I started one of the things that got me started on this was way back when I was a 15-year-old growing up in Brazil, about someone saying God doesn't want us to leave the earth. I was actually talking about this project with one of my friends who different religion than me, and it says, oh, nobody needs to worry about this. The second coming of Jesus is going to happen any day now. Don't worry about any of this stuff. And I thought, okay, that's another religious perspective, and it's apparently still active out there. And so good luck with that and talking to your friends about this. We don't know what the size of the minimum viable population has been. This has been studied in biology for over a decade now, but we have not applied it to humans off Earth. We don't know what the appetite is for various governments to actually support studies like this going forward, but I personally think it'll be very important. The travel will be necessary, and it will be for the future of humanity, for the reasons you all know better than I am. And we will have plenty of people to volunteer, I think, throughout the world. And I think besides plenty of people to volunteer, many of those will be Catholic, Baptist, Buddhist, whatever. Thank you.
Thank you. Very thought-provoking. Science fiction can sometimes give us a sandbox to play with ideas. And one of those ideas, Eric Flint and David Freer had a book, I believe it was Slow Train to Arcturus, the idea of a ship, a generational ship that actually had bubbles. And the bubbles were individual colony forming units. And the bubbles also organized themselves by religion. And it made for an interesting concept because of the idea, again, we're playing, and there was some bias by the authors, which is very interesting because they've got very, very different religious views. And it raises several interesting questions. If we were to mix everybody as a city would be now on Earth, We have one situation. If we were to allow separation, as the colonies themselves might separate, consider the Pilgrims, and where I live in North Carolina, we consider the Moravians, who came from Central Europe to the Americas. We may see very, very different approaches to the colonization, which could raise the prospect of religious wars even within the worldship. I find it a very, very interesting comment and very thought-provoking, and I thank you for this presentation, because I think it's worth talking about now. As you say, we need to think now, not do it in the middle of the flight.
Yeah, the famous Dune series had lots of religious conflict in it, for those of you that read it.
And I'd just like to get your opinion. Do you think, we are used in the United States to have many congregations, right? Many different flavors and all different kinds of religions, and that's what we're used to here. But do you think that is the most viable approach for a generationship, or do you think a mono-religious approach would be best? And this is just your opinion.
I think a mono-religious starship would be not survivable. As I mentioned, 25% of adults change religious preferences over time.
A while ago, I was working with a group, and this one coworker was a Hasidic Jew, and we both read science fiction. And I said, "You realize, of course, that Jews can't go into space." And he was going, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, when you get there, after you figure out what's edible, you have to figure out what's kosher." And so, at this point, you really need to send a council of rabbis into space in order to determine that this little thing with tentacles is kosher, you can eat it. So you're going to need a council of rabbis and imams and anybody else who has dietary restrictions to make a distinction between that which can be consumed and that which can't be consumed.
Sounds like we're opening ourselves up to some nice jokes, too. Thank you.